Today, we are excited to welcome Ricardo León, president of the Cuyahoga Land Bank. Prior to joining the Land Bank, Ricardo served as the executive director of the Metro West Community Development Organization, serving 3 Cleveland Near West neighborhoods, Stockyards, Clark Fulton, and Brooklyn Center. Ricardo's career has spanned the startup, corporate, and consulting industries prior to joining the nonprofit sector. He extends his leadership and community focus outside of the office through his participation on the board of directors for the Metro Health Foundation, Fund for Our Economic Future, Front Steps Housing and Services, Neighborhood Family Practice, Hebrew Free Loan Association, the CHN Housing Capital Advisory Board, and numerous other community-focused committees. And we are very happy to have him here today with us. Please welcome Ricardo.
Good afternoon, everybody. Happy to be here. I'm excited to be here with you all. I have a relatively brief presentation I'm going to share on our 15-year economic impact analysis. I think some of the folks in the crowd have already heard this. I apologize if you've already heard it. You're going to hear it again, except this time I won't have the help of a couple of my colleagues. So I hope I don't butcher those slides, but I'm going to do my best to get through this. I've also never done it in 10 minutes, so I'm going to do my best to do it in 10. I may go over a minute or two, but I think I'll be all right. So let me just screen share here. And then, all right, and everybody can see my slides? Awesome, okay. So what we're gonna talk about today is the presentation of our findings of a 15-year economic impact analysis for the Cuyahoga Land Bank. And before we kick off, I just want to start with a quote from our late founder and the immediate past president of the Land Bank, Gus Frangos. This is a quote he gave to us as we were kind of going through this 15-year impact process. And he said, "Houses represent stability, opportunity, and a foundation for a brighter future." And I think that not only does that sum Gus up well, but I think it sums up the work of the Land Bank over these last 15 years. So the study overview, really what we looked to do was to assess 15 years of economic impact that the Land Bank has had in service to Cuyahoga County. Some folks may recall in 2019, the Land Bank did a 10-year economic impact analysis where we looked at, in the first 10 years of service to the county, what was our impact? And in that analysis back in 2019, we found our impact was about 1.4 billion. As we were coming up on our 15-year anniversary, which we celebrated last summer, we thought, well, what could we do to kind of celebrate the 15 years? So, well, let's think about the impact that we've had in these additional 5 years as we've added kind of new stuff to the portfolio. And so we really looked at 6 key components, and that's the impact of our demolition work, our renovation work, our new construction, the property tax revenue we were able to get back on the tax rolls, our catalyzed private expenditures, so that's kind of like the but-for analysis, right? Those projects that wouldn't have happened without the land bank's assistance, and then our actual expenditures, the money that has flowed through the land bank in these first 15 years. And so I'm going to jump into the kind of the methodology and then speak a little bit about the data, and then we'll transition to the findings of the report. So a couple things we did from the methodology perspective is we had to define the sub-markets, right? We broke the county into kind of 6 sub-markets, and we did that through a clustering algorithm and a k-means analysis. And then we also addressed the actual property value impacts through the spatial econometric analysis using a spatial Durbin model, and then looked at both direct, indirect, and the total effects of these. So as an example for clustering for the folks who are, maybe aren't in this world, if you look at this data, this kind of just looks like a random smattering of data. This looks at median house value versus unemployment rate. And so the thinking, you would think, you look at this, oh, this data doesn't really say much. But when you apply these methodologies to them, you'll find that there actually are clusters, right? You can look at the way that data is clustered in unique ways. And so like in actual analysis, we looked at, this was some data we looked at here for Cuyahoga County. If you look at the unemployment rate versus median house value, in communities that have a higher unemployment rate, you tend to have a lower median house value. It's kind of, once you think about it that way, it's not necessarily that counterintuitive. But again, had we not done this clustering, you maybe would have just looked at this as just a kind of random data on a screen. So for our analysis, we looked at a treasure trove of things to kind of identify what are those clusters in Cuyahoga County, right? We looked at household income, median value, median rent, house size, when was it built. In total, there's like 40 plus different things that we looked at to kind of identify what are those sub-markets within Cuyahoga County. And so After doing that analysis, we really found kind of 6 submarkets, and we have them colored here from the weakest to the strongest. And the reason why we need to do this is because there are tailored strategies that you have to have when you're addressing the needs of different communities, right? So a community that may be a weaker market community may have a larger impact from demolition or renovation than a stronger one, and vice versa. And so really what we found was there's really kind of, based on the data we used, there's about 6 markets really in Cuyahoga County. So starting from a kind of the outside, like exurbs, you see kind of those are the strongest markets. Kind of again, intuitively, you would think that's kind of the case, right? Then kind of stepping in from there, you have kind of like what we would call kind of like the second weakest markets. And that's kind of looking at like again, like Lakewood Heights area. Then you kind of have like that middle market, kind of that area there, those east side entering suburbs, west side entering suburbs. Then you have kind of the area immediately outside of the city and kind of the west side, southwest side of the city. That's kind of like the next level down. And then certainly we see kind of the weakest market in kind of that crescent shape on the east and southeast side of the city. One thing again, if you've studied any maps from Cleveland or Cuyahoga County, this really shouldn't surprise you. You can kind of lay over this map with a redlining map or a lead issues map or a housing value map, and it's kind of the same maps. Again, the data is kind of intuitive in that way. So then looking at the actual like spatial Durbin model, like the model we used, this represents like one house. We just picked a random parcel, and this is on East 69th Street. And we looked to identify kind of the value of that individual parcel. You have to look at a function of, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, age, condition, how many foreclosures have happened or how many tax delinquencies are there within a certain geographic boundary to that house. And so that's kind of how you identify what that value or the sale, in this point, the sales price of that individual parcel. However, we know that individual parcels and homes don't exist in a vacuum, right? They are influenced by their neighbors' values and characteristics as well, and also their neighbors' neighbors, and also their neighbors' neighbors' neighbors. So each and every house influences kind of this entire network within a community across the county, in a way that it's kind of thinking about, if you think about a pool or a bathtub and you drop a pebble in it, there's a ripple effect that goes out and there's a ripple effect that goes back in. And so that's how all valuation really across the county, in particular in the residential space, all of these things are influencing one another, whether you think about it or not. The reality is that everything that happens is not isolated, right? It's just not in a vacuum. So what we did is we wanted to look at the direct effects, right? Again, so that's that sales price function, kind of bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage. But we also wanted to look at the indirect effects. So what are the things that are happening around this home that aren't necessarily under control of the homeowner of that property? And then we wanted to take and look at both of those together, right? The total effect, meaning the indirect and the direct effect. And so we use the coefficients from the spatial Durbin model to capture that entire effect. And that's kind of the basis of the data that we use to create this analysis. Then the way we were able to actually create this analysis is Cleveland is a data rich, certainly much more so than most other places, I would say, in Ohio, maybe even the country. We're an incredibly data rich community. And so we leveraged the parcel level data from NeoCanDo, the NST system. For those of you who are in the community and economic development space, you're probably familiar with that tool. And that's parcel specific data. There's 50, 60 plus different variables for every single parcel across the county. So more than 500,000 parcels. We took that data. We also pulled data from our internal system, the Land Bank's property profile system. And then we kind of merged those data sets and then created comprehensive data set for modeling the impacts of our analysis. And again, had this analysis been done somewhere else, I don't know if we would have had as much data as possible to really find the answers that we were looking for. And we're actually going to be testing that out because we may be doing this for the statewide Land Bank Association. So just jumping into the impacts, I think this is the fun stuff. So we looked at the impact of our demolitions. So to date, at the time that this was completed, we've now crossed over the 10,000 threshold. But at the time that this data was cut off, right, June 30th of 24, the Land Bank had completed just shy of 9,900 demolitions, with a total residential property value impact of about 1.46 billion. So that was an average impact of about 148,000 per demolition at an average benefit to cost ratio of about $9.74. So for every $1 spent in demolition, there was about $9.74 in impact to the region, to the county. Looking at renovations, again, at the time of this analysis, we had completed just shy of 2,700 renovations, either directly ourselves or in partnership with other folks. We have historically partnered with CDCs, nonprofits, Habitat, CHN, et cetera, kind of different groups who do renovation, as well as the private developer community. So we had done just shy of 27 renovations that either we did ourselves or through partners, with a residential property value impact of just shy of $1 billion, 949 million, with an average impact of about 358,000 and an average BCR, again, of about $13.52. So again, for every dollar of spent on renovation, there's about $13.52 of impact to the county and to not only at home, but to all the homes around it. Looking at our residential new construction, this is kind of our newest line of business. In 2019, we hadn't actually done one yet. So this was like we had helped facilitate, but we hadn't done any ourselves. So now the land bank we've done about just shy of about maybe 4 dozen new construction units ourselves over the years. So at the time of this analysis, we had completed about 243 new constructions, again, either ourselves or in partnership with someone else, resulting in a property value impact of about 142.8 million. Average impact of about 587,000, with an average BCR of about $1.75. Similarly, again, it's for every dollar of new construction, it's about $1.75 in impact. That number is lower than the rehab, certainly, just because it's more expensive to build new homes than it's to rehab homes, right? Particularly early on in the early days of the land bank, we were still getting homes that were in relatively good shape. These days, that's different, certainly for the folks who are dealing with vacant and abandoned properties. We know what vacant and abandoned properties look like today, but early on, we definitely had some better quality homes. Now looking at cumulative tax restore, this is kind of one of the coolest things I think about the analysis that we completed. We wanted to look at has the land bank been able to get property tax back on the tax rolls? And if so, to what degree? And so went back to 2010 and started looking at year over year. And to date, as of 2020, the finalization of this study, we had brought $48.2 million back into the tax rolls of restored tax value, right? So that was taxes that were not existent because these homes were vacant and abandoned and no one was maintaining them, and we've been able to get them back onto the tax rolls. And the coolest thing that you'll see is over the last couple years, we've seen kind of a year over year growth in the valuation as we're being able to bring units back on. You'll see that there's the 7.5 million, 7.6, 6.8. So what's really cool is that we're seeing kind of not only is the total number growing, but for the most part, we're seeing kind of an incremental growth year over year as well. Then we looked at kind of that private sector investment that was catalyzed, again, that kind of but-for analysis of had the land bank not been involved, would these projects potentially been able to happen or not? And so in total, we look back kind of from the beginning of time of all the different projects that we were involved in, and we're able to use the kind of pro forma of those deals that we were able to spur about $395 million in private investment. It was, I think, over 40 projects that we looked at. A couple of these that you'll see here is kind of the Amazon in North Randall, Miscellany Dairy, the Children's Museum. But again, there was like over 40 of these that the land bank had a critical part in helping that project come to fruition, whether it was site acquisition, demolition, a combination of. Some of them we actually participated in actually, with the project itself. But it was just a way of showing that, again, the land bank has been critical to some level of economic development activity across the county over the last 15 years. And then lastly, we looked again at our actual expenditures ourselves. So going back to the beginning of time from when we opened our doors in summer of 2009, the land bank has expended about $330 million. That's money that has flowed through us and gone back out into the community. And then we use this data set, the in-plan data set that looks at that data, geographic specific and sector specific, and really it creates an analysis to see how does that money flow through the local economy. And so we used the in-plan data to find that our total impact of our expenditure was about 632 million. So it was about a 1.9 multiplier on the funding that we had through us. And that was through direct, indirect, and induced expenditures and earnings. And so the best way I can describe that is like a direct expense is like me giving you $5 and you go to the grocery store and you buy a loaf of bread. The indirect expense is that grocer saying, okay, we sold another bread, we got to stock more bread. So they spend money stocking the shelves. And then the induced effect is that the owner of that grocery store then going and having a nice dinner with his wife that night, right? So we can look at using in-plan data, we can look at how our expenditure flowed through the economy in these ways. And again, we had about a 1.9 multiplier for every dollar that flowed through the land bank over the last 15 years. So in summary, kind of when you add that all together, all of these elements together, the land bank has had about a $3.6 billion impact since the beginning of time for us in 2009. About 1.47 billion in demolition, about 950 million from renovation, 143 million from new construction. We were able to bring about $48 million back on the tax rolls, and we were able to, our expenditure created about a $630 million impact. And so in total, when you aggregate all of that since the beginning of time, we've had economic impact for every $1 spent of about $11. So it's an $11 return on the resources that we spent versus the impact that we've seen kind of ripple out through our community. So I will stop sharing there. I know it's a lot of data and information to take in, but I am happy to answer any questions.
Ricardo, thank you. I think you covered an amazing amount of ground in that amount of time, and it's just phenomenal to see the true impact that your organization is having in our community. Couple questions about the data. So in your database, do you have all parcels or only the ones that you have control over?
So we looked at all parcels for the entire county, even the ones that we didn't touch. Yeah, so that's the unique thing about the analysis is we're able to see not only the things that we touched, but just in general the entire county. And again, that is through the NeoCanDo NST tool that gives us access to the entire really county, every single parcel in the county. I think it's over 500,000 parcels.
And as you look back over those 15 years, how might your data be impacted by kind of the housing market crashes and kind of the ebbs and flows of the economy?
Oh, for sure. I mean, that is really, we were created as a response to the market, the mortgage foreclosure crisis, right? In 2009, when we opened our doors for folks who were in the housing space, then you know that we were knee deep in the throes of the foreclosure crisis. We had rampant vacancy and abandonment going, not just in the urban core, like certainly in the city of Cleveland and the, southeast side, southwest side, but we were seeing it across the county, even in our urban and ex-urban communities. And so that really affected, that was what forced the creation of the land bank. What I would say is like what we saw in the effect there, as I mentioned, particularly on the rehab side, early on we were doing we did a lot of rehabs because properties were in relatively good condition. But again, we were getting properties in those kind of some of those weaker markets. Similarly, we did a lot of demolition in those weaker markets where it had a bigger impact. So certainly the foreclosure crisis is not only the reason we were here, but has affected that data. But I think it's interesting to see that like we now are seeing, 15 years removed, we're kind of finally getting to a place where we're seeing most of our communities stabilizing. I'll shout out the group, the VAPAC group, Frank Ford and his group, where they've done an analysis and shown that most of our communities have gone back to kind of the pre-recession values. Not all of them, certainly, but we are seeing a gradual coming back to those pre-recession values.
And can you share kind of your funding model for the various lines of work that you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So our core funding model, we have a kind of a core fund that we receive year over year. It's the delinquent tax assessment collection. So if you think about it, every year, you get a tax bill. On average, about 85% of people pay their tax bill on time, right? It's whether it's your mortgage, whether you pay it through your mortgage or you use like the county's new Easy Pay system. But there's like that 15% of folks who don't pay on time. About 80% of those folks end up paying eventually at some point. And when they pay, they're assessed a 10% late fee, essentially. And so the land bank gets half of that through the state statute. County land banks are able to get up to half of that kind of late fee that comes in. And so that's our main funding source. And what it has turned into is on average about $5.5 to $7 million a year in funding that comes through the land bank to help us operate, and just do the overall day-to-day operation. And then a bunch of the work that you see here, the demolition, the rehab, new construction, then we have gone out year over year and fundraised at the federal level, at the state level, at the county level, grant funding and other opportunities to be able to do the actual day-to-day work.
And can you walk us through the process of once a parcel is identified, how do you go about acquiring that piece of property?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be a couple different ways. These days, it's unique because the land bank is kind of in a unique place now where, and sometimes we have to compete even with the private sector. But so early on, let's say for the first decade or so of our life, there was properties would go into vacancy and abandonment. They'd go into tax foreclosure. When they got through the tax foreclosure process, if no one wanted them, there was an opportunity where the land bank could get those homes, right? We were able to get those properties kind of directly through the tax foreclosure process. For a number of reasons, like things changes that have happened, we don't really operate in that way anymore. These days is we have access to state forfeiture. So if a home goes through tax foreclosure, it goes to sale twice. It doesn't sell, like meaning nobody wants it. The state of Ohio will say, well, that home is now in state forfeiture. A lot of folks think that means that the state owns the house. They don't. It's kind of like a limbo essentially, where these houses just kind of sit out there. Well, again, through our land bank statute at the state level, county land banks are really the only entities that have access to those state forfeiture properties with the goal of getting them productive again. And if you can't get them productive, at least bring them down so they're not creating that vacancy and that blight and the issues that come with that in our communities. So state forfeiture is kind of a big vehicle for us now. But also, as I mentioned, what we've been doing a lot of is we've opened up our wallet at sheriff's sale and we'll acquire homes. We have certainly had some folks who will deed us a property, in lieu of tax foreclosure. It's pretty rare these days, but it does happen every now and then. And every now and then we'll just find like a private, somebody will privately approach us and say, I have this home, would you like to buy it? It's rare, but it happens every now and then.
Can you give us a preview of some of the projects that are upcoming for you in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do so. So some of the things we're working on, a lot of stuff that's kind of been in the news lately. The land bank was through our partnership with the Ohio Department of Development. We were awarded the county of Ohio, Cuyahoga County was awarded $110 million in brownfield funding to do 34 brownfield projects. So when we think about brownfield, this is like the legacy blight stuff, right? Like the old factories or manufacturing facilities or old gas stations that have been kind of sitting vacant and abandoned, some of them for decades. We were able, through a program that the Ohio Department of Development created and we applied for, we were able to get 34 projects funded this year. And so a couple of those are our direct projects we're going to be directly managing. So a lot of those projects are ones we're going to be working with a developer or a group or, a municipality to help bring those units down. So that's kind of like a big focus of our work this year. We'll be dealing with a lot of that legacy blight. A separate program from the same department, Ohio Department of Development, was the demolition program. We got $23 million to do 1,100 demolitions. So we're still demolishing. That was always kind of our bread and butter. I think for a long time, people just knew us as the demolition organization, even though we do more stuff. So this year we'll knock down another 1,100 structures using that funding. And then additionally, we've gotten funded two pieces of funding from the city of Cleveland to do targeted investment and redevelopment in wards 5, 10, and 14, both new construction and rehab, and then also partnering with Mayor Bibb and his administration and doing some strategic investment in the southeast side. So we are keeping ourselves busy, certainly, kind of in every facet, both demolition, rehab, new construction, and kind of taking on this new, cool, exciting legacy blight stuff as well.
Ricardo, you have been in this role for the past few months, so curious to some initial reflections from your position of leading the organization.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting. It's an exciting opportunity, and I love my job. I get to like wake up and like help the community every day, which is pretty cool. It's kind of an extension of what I was doing in my previous role at Metro West. Um, I think one of the things that it has been most exciting for me is thinking through, and I got to give props to Gus, right, our founder and our late president. Um, as Gus was creating this organization over the kind of 15 years that he led it, we've got a bunch of really cool, exciting tools in our toolbox, and he helped us create a bunch of those cool tools in our toolbox. And so what I'm most excited for, and what he and I were working on together, before his untimely passing, was thinking through like how do we open that toolbox up for the community, for folks, our partners, our municipal partners, our development partners, nonprofit CDCs. How can we use the tools in the land bank toolbox to help those organizations find success? And so that's really what I'm most excited for this year is like how do we start? And we've been doing this a lot already, right? We have tons of partners that we work with, but really honing in and thinking through where are there ways where we can use the uniqueness of the land bank to help other folks find success.
And can you talk a little bit about the partners that you collaborate with and what gaps in partnerships are you currently seeking to fill?
Yeah, absolutely. So our partnerships kind of range the full spectrum. Again, a lot of municipal partners. We worked with a lot of municipalities, particularly kind of the inner ring suburbs, whether it's helping them kind of unlock a piece of land that they couldn't kind of figure out or was in tax foreclosure or whatever the case may be. But we've worked with a lot with municipal partners. We work a lot in the nonprofit CDC space. I think we've probably worked with every single community development corporation, since the beginning, since we opened our doors. We do a lot of work with like Habitat for Humanity on the affordable housing side, CHN Housing Partners, and others. So really kind of the full spectrum. I mean, we work with private developers as well here and there, again, mainly on like the land aggregation and helping them kind of acquire and put pieces of the puzzle together for potential projects. And I would say here going into 2025 and beyond, we're looking to continue building upon those categories and like all those different groups, but really hoping to kind of keep honing in on the affordable side, as well as through our land bank charities. We do a lot of work with like vulnerable populations. So, it could be, we work with a lot of organizations that support, it could be kids aging out of foster care, it could be returning citizens, folks with addiction issues, whatever the case may be. Housing may not be like the main thing they do, but it's a component of what they do. And so our hope is to keep beefing that line of work up as well, because there's kind of an entire group of our, of populations out there who really are the most housing vulnerable. And our hope is to continue kind of not only shedding a light on that, but finding resources to help those folks as well.
As you reflect on the organization, what are some of the greatest strengths of the land bank, and what are some of the greater challenges you see as you look ahead to the next 5, 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the strengths, I mean, the biggest strength of the organization, bar none, is our team. I mean, this is like the most talented group of folks I've ever had the pleasure of working with. We've got 38 folks with two more coming, so we'll be at around 40 folks here. And everyone is like not only are they incredibly intelligent, but they're passionate. They love what they do. They want to be here. Like it's an amazing feeling to have. And for those of folks in the audience who have run organizations or are in leadership roles, this can be challenging at times. Of like, there's always a couple stragglers here and there who you can tell kind of don't necessarily fully believe the mission. That's not the case at the land bank. Like everyone here is here because they believe in the work and they want to help the community. So I think that's quite frankly, that's the biggest strength of the organization. I think the challenge for the organization will be those non overhead funding, right? So like we get that funding to help pay for staff, and that's great. But there's always like the funding for demolition, for renovation, for the legacy blight stuff. It's kind of a revolving door, and programs ebb and flow, and they come and they run out of money, and they don't get refunded. And so that's going to be the biggest challenges for us. Is we have a kind of a nice sizable pot of funding right now to do that critical demolition and legacy blight work. But 2, 3 years from now, what are those funding sources going to be? What will they look like? Will they be available to us? We need to start really getting more creative and thinking through what other opportunities are out there to be able to do that kind of critical work. I think a lot of folks think that the problem has been solved in a way. And for those of us who are in this space, I think about the work Western Reserve did with the city of Cleveland. We know for a fact that vacancy and abandonment is still a major issue in our county, and it's creating a bunch of kind of secondary issues, right? Whether it's crime or lowering of values or lowering of our tax base. And so the work has not been completed. We've been here 15 years. It'll probably take us another 15 or 20 years to really kind of solve the problem. And so our hope is that we can get folks to understand that, the problem hasn't been solved, and we want to keep kind of taking a stab at it.
And for those of us on the call, how can we support you in helping to address those challenges and move your vision forward?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think the one is just awareness. It's just being aware of the fact that we're here, that, if you're running into issues or folks who are in this space who are having these issues, feel free to connect them to us. Again, we're always hoping to connect and partner. Partnership is what drives the success of this organization. So certainly just general awareness. Beyond that, I would say for those folks who really are interested, particularly in that vulnerable population work or serving kind of the most needy folks in our community, I would encourage you to check out, CuyahogaLandBankCharities.org and look at the work that we're doing. And if you feel so compelled to donate or whatever the case may be, happy to do so as well. But again, for us, it's really just trying to get the awareness out there, not only of the work that we're doing, but the work that all these amazing organizations we partner with are doing as well.
Well, Ricardo, we thank you for your time today and the insights into the work of the Cuyahoga Land Bank. And thank you for all that you and your team are doing to help move Cleveland along.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the time.